Captain Jake Morrison adjusted his helmet one final time as he walked across the tarmac toward the sleek F-22 Raptor. The morning sun reflected off the aircraft's angular surfaces, creating a dazzling display of light and shadow. This was supposed to be a routine transport flight to Edwards Air Force Base, but something felt different today. His wingman, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, fell into step beside him. "Did you see our passenger yet?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of curiosity. Jake shook his head. "Just got the manifest this morning. Someone important enough to rate an F-22 escort? But they didn't give us much detail. Military brass, probably." The two pilots had been flying together for 3 years, and Jake had learned to trust Sarah's instincts. If something was bothering her, it was worth paying attention to. They reached their aircraft, and Jake could see the passenger jet sitting on the adjacent runway, a small military transport that looked insignificant next to the sophisticated fighters. "There," Sarah pointed toward the transport. "That's her." Jake followed her gaze and saw a woman in civilian clothes walking toward the aircraft. She appeared to be in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore dark jeans, a leather jacket, and carried a small duffel bag. Nothing about her suggested military rank or importance. She looked like someone's grandmother heading out for a weekend trip. "That's it?" Jake said, somewhat disappointed. "I was expecting someone in dress blues with a chest full of medals." "Don't judge a book by its cover," Sarah replied, but her eyes remained fixed on the woman. "Something about her seems familiar." The woman moved with a confident stride, her posture straight and purposeful. As she approached the transport's boarding steps, she paused and turned toward the F-22 seconds. For a moment, her eyes met Jake's across the distance. Even from far away, he could see intelligence and strength in that gaze. She raised her hand in a small wave before disappearing into the aircraft. 20 minutes later, both F-22 seconds were airborne, flanking the transport at a respectful distance. Jake checked his instruments and settled into the rhythm of the flight. The communications crackled to life as air traffic control passed them from one sector to another. "Raptor lead, this is Transport 77, came the voice from the passenger jet. "Everything looks good from here. Thanks for the escort." "Copy, Transport 77, Jake responded. "We'll be with you all the way to Edwards." The flight progressed smoothly for the first hour. Jake found himself glancing occasionally at the transport, wondering about its mysterious passenger. In his 10 years of military flying, he had escorted plenty of VIPs, from senators to foreign dignitaries. Usually, they provided detailed briefings about who they were protecting and why. This time, the orders had been remarkably sparse. Sarah's voice came through his headset on a private channel. "Jake, I've been thinking about our passenger. That woman looked really familiar, but I can't place where I might have seen her." "Maybe she's been on base before," Jake suggested. "Could be Pentagon brass making regular visits." "Maybe," Sarah said, but she didn't sound convinced. As they crossed over Nevada, Jake noticed storm clouds building ahead. The weather briefing had mentioned possible turbulence, but the radar showed it was more extensive than predicted. He contacted the Transport 77. "We're seeing some weather ahead. Recommend we climb to flight level 390 to get above it." "Negative, Raptor lead," came the reply. "Passenger requests we maintain current altitude." "She says the view is too good to miss." Jake exchanged glances with Sarah through their canopies. It was unusual for a passenger to have input on flight operations, especially during potentially rough weather. Most VIPs preferred the smoothest ride possible. "Copy, Transport 77. We'll adjust our formation to provide better coverage if it gets bumpy." The storm hit them 15 minutes later. Jake watched as the transport began bouncing through the turbulence. He and Sarah moved closer, ready to provide assistance if needed. The transport's pilot was skilled, maintaining steady course and altitude despite the challenging conditions. Then something unexpected happened. Jake's radio crackled with a transmission, but it wasn't coming from the transport's pilot. "Raptor lead, this is your passenger," came a clear, confident voice. "I'm seeing some nasty cells building to our northeast. Recommend we vector 15 degrees left to avoid the worst of it." Jake was stunned. Passengers didn't make weather recommendations. and the voice carried an authority that made him want to comply immediately. Transport 77. Confirm your passenger is making navigation recommendations. There was a brief pause before the transport pilot responded, his voice carrying a note of amusement. That's affirmative, Raptor Lead. I'd suggest listening to her. She knows what she's talking about. Jake looked at his weather radar and saw the building storm cells exactly where the passenger had indicated. Her recommendation would indeed take them around the worst of the weather. Copy, passenger. Vectoring left 15 degrees. As they adjusted course, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to their mysterious passenger than met the eye. The way she had assessed the weather, the confidence in her voice, and the transport pilot's immediate deference all suggested someone with extensive aviation experience. Sarah's voice came through his headset again. Jake, civilian passengers don't read weather radar from the cabin. She's looking at instruments, and she knows how to use them. I know, Jake replied. The question is, who is she? The storm passed, and they continued toward Edwards in clear skies. Jake found himself paying more attention to the radio, hoping to hear the passenger's voice again. When she spoke, there was something in her tone that commanded respect. It reminded him of his old flight instructor, a retired colonel who could read weather and flying conditions like others read newspapers. As they began their descent toward Edwards Air Force Base, Jake realized this routine escort mission had become one of the most intriguing flights of his career. The woman in civilian clothes wasn't just any passenger. She was someone with deep aviation knowledge and the kind of authority that came from years of experience. But who was she, and why was her identity being kept so carefully hidden? The approach to Edwards Air Force Base was routine until everything changed. Jake was beginning his descent checklist when an emergency call crackled through the radio. Mayday, Mayday. This is Falcon 3-2 declaring an emergency. Engine failure. Losing altitude rapidly. Request immediate vectors to nearest airfield. Jake's training kicked in immediately. He scanned his instruments and located the aircraft on radar. A small civilian plane, about 20 miles northeast of their position. Rapidly losing altitude over mountainous terrain. Falcon 3-2, this is Raptor Lead. I have you on radar. Edwards is your closest option, but you're awful low for that approach. The civilian pilot's voice was strained with panic. Raptor Lead. I don't think I can make it to Edwards. Looking for any flat ground to put her down. Jake's heart sank. The terrain below was nothing but rocky hills and narrow canyons. A forced landing would likely be fatal. He was about to suggest emergency procedures when another voice cut through the radio, the same calm, authoritative voice they had heard earlier. Falcon 3-2, this is. There was a brief pause. This is Phoenix. What's your aircraft type and current altitude? Phoenix? The panicked pilot responded. I'm in a Cessna 172. Currently at 3,000 feet and dropping fast. Engines completely dead. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Phoenix. He had heard that call sign before, but couldn't place where. Sarah's sharp intake of breath over the radio told him she recognized it too. Falcon 3-2, Phoenix here, the woman continued, her voice steady as a rock. I need you to listen carefully. Look to your 2 o'clock position. Do you see a long, flat valley running northwest? Yes. Yes, I see it. That's Antelope Valley. It's dry lake bed, perfectly flat. Turn right heading 270 immediately. You have enough altitude to make it if you start gliding now. Jake watched his radar as the civilian aircraft adjusted course. The woman's directions were perfect. She was guiding the pilot toward one of the few areas in the region where a safe emergency landing was possible. Transport 77, Jake called. How is your passenger able to see the terrain? Does she have access to charts or radar? Negative on electronic aids, came the transport pilot's amused reply. She's looking out the window and using 30 years of memory. 30 years of memory? Jake's mind raced. Who had 30 years of detailed knowledge about this area? Then it hit him like a thunderbolt. Edwards Air Force Base. Test pilots. Phoenix. Sarah. he whispered on their private channel. Phoenix. Wasn't that the test pilot? Sarah whispered back. The first woman to break the sound barrier in experimental aircraft. But that was decades ago. On the main frequency, Phoenix continued coaching the civilian pilot. Falcon 3-2, you're doing great. Maintain best, glide speed, 75 knots. You'll touch down on hard-packed sand, just like a runway. How do you know all this? The civilian pilot asked, his voice slightly calmer now. I've landed there before, Phoenix replied simply. Jake felt his pulse quicken. A test pilot who had landed on the dry lake beds around Edwards 100 times. Someone with intimate knowledge of every canyon, hill, and emergency landing site in the region. The pieces were falling into place. But he couldn't quite believe it. Falcon 3-2. You're 2 miles from touchdown, Phoenix continued. The surface looks smooth from here. Remember, no brakes until you're rolling slow. The sand will stop you naturally. Jake watched on radar as the civilian aircraft touched down safely on the lake bed. A cheer erupted from the Transport 77. Phoenix, this is Falcon 3-2, came the grateful voice. I can't thank you enough. You saved my life. Who are you? There was a long pause. When Phoenix spoke again, her voice carried decades of pride and experience. Call sign Phoenix, United States Air Force, retired. Major General Rebecca. Phoenix Martinez. Jake nearly dropped his flight controls. Major General Martinez. The Phoenix. Every pilot in the Air Force knew that name. Even if many had never seen her face, she was a legend. The woman who had pushed the boundaries of flight testing, broken numerous speed and altitude records, and paved the way for women in combat aviation. Phoenix, Jake called, his voice filled with awe. This is Raptor Lead. General Martinez, it's an honor to be flying with you today. Just call me Phoenix, Captain, came her reply. And thank you for the escort, though I have to say, you boys are flying my old route. I used to test the early stealth prototypes over this same path. Sarah's voice was barely controlled excitement. General, you flew the stealth development programs? For 15 years, Phoenix replied. Including the early F-22 prototypes. You're flying right now. I probably put the first 100 hours on the airframes that became the production models. Jake felt a wave of reverence wash over him. He was flying an aircraft that Phoenix had helped develop and test. The woman who had seemed like an ordinary passenger was actually one of the most accomplished pilots in aviation history. Edwards Tower, this is Transport 77 requesting priority landing, the transport pilot called. We have a VIP passenger who just conducted a successful emergency rescue coordination. Transport 77, Edwards Tower. You're cleared for straight-in approach runway 222, and please pass our compliments to Phoenix. There are a lot of people here who remember her. As they descended toward the runway, Jake realized why the morning had felt different. They hadn't been escorting just any passenger. They had been flying with aviation royalty. Phoenix had been quietly observing their flying, their procedures, and their professionalism. Probably evaluating the current generation of fighter pilots. General Martinez, Jake said as they approached the pattern. If you don't mind me asking, what brings you to Edwards today? Phoenix's chuckle was warm and familiar. They're dedicating a new test facility in my name tomorrow. But honestly, I just wanted to fly this route one more time. To see how the new generation handles the aircraft I helped bring to life. And? Sarah asked. How are we doing? Not bad, Phoenix said. Though you might want to adjust your formation spacing in turbulence. We were bouncing around more than necessary back there. Jake smiled. Even in retirement, Phoenix was still teaching. Still pushing pilots to be better. She had guided them through weather, helped save a civilian pilot, and provided a masterclass in aviation leadership, all while appearing to be nothing more than a quiet passenger. As they touched down at Edwards, Jake felt honored to have shared the sky with a true pioneer. The woman in civilian clothes was actually one of the most distinguished pilots who had ever lived. and she had given them a glimpse into what real experience and leadership looked like. But he suspected the best part of this story was yet to come. As the 3 aircraft taxied toward the Edwards flight line, Jake could see an unusual amount of activity on the ground. Word had apparently spread quickly that Phoenix was arriving. Ground crews, pilots, and maintenance personnel were gathering along the taxiway, many of them standing at attention. Transport 77, ground control. Direct taxi to the VIP terminal. You'll have a reception committee waiting. Jake watched through his canopy as the transport came to a stop. Before the engines had even spun down, a group of senior officers approached the aircraft. Leading them was a tall man with silver eagles on his uniform, Colonel Patterson, the base commander. Raptor lead, ground control. Taxi to spot 7. Colonel Patterson requests both pilots report to the VIP terminal after shutdown. 20 minutes later, Jake and Sarah found themselves walking across the tarmac toward the terminal, their flight gear slung over their shoulders. They could hear voices and laughter coming from inside the building. As they entered, Jake was amazed by the scene. The room was filled with people. Current test pilots, retired officers, ground crews, and civilian engineers. At the center of it all stood Phoenix, still in her civilian clothes, surrounded by admirers. She looked completely at ease, shaking hands and sharing stories with people who clearly revered her. Colonel Patterson spotted them and waved them over. Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Chen, come meet your passenger properly. As they approached, Phoenix turned toward them with a warm smile. Up close, Jake could see the sharp intelligence in her eyes, and the confident bearing that came from decades of pushing the envelope in dangerous aircraft. Phoenix, these are your escort pilots, Colonel Patterson said. Captain Jake Morrison and Lieutenant Sarah Chen. Phoenix extended her hand to Jake first. Her grip was firm, confident. Captain, thank you for the smooth ride. And excellent formation work, by the way. You kept perfect position, even in that weather. Thank you, General. It was an honor, Jake replied, meaning every word. She turned to Sarah. Lieutenant Chen, I was impressed with your weather awareness earlier. You spotted those building cells before your radar did. Sarah beamed. Thank you, ma'am. I learned from watching my grandfather. He was a crop duster, always reading clouds and wind. Good instincts are something you can't teach. Phoenix nodded approvingly. They'll serve you well. Colonel Patterson cleared his throat. General Martinez was just telling us about your rescue coordination today. That civilian pilot owes his life to quick thinking and expert guidance. Just applied some local knowledge, Phoenix said modestly. I've made emergency landings on every flat piece of ground within 50 miles of this base. Some planned, some not so much. An older man in civilian clothes approached their group. Jake recognized him as Dr. Williams, the chief engineer on the current F-22 upgrade program. Rebecca, I have to ask, Dr. Williams said. What did you think of the current F-22 flight characteristics? Any observations from riding along today? Phoenix considered the question carefully. The aircraft has matured beautifully. When we were testing the prototypes 25 years ago, we could only dream of the reliability and performance you've achieved. But, Colonel Patterson prompted, the pilots are good, very good, but they rely too much on automation. When that civilian plane declared an emergency today, Captain Morrison's first instinct was to check his electronic systems rather than look out the window. Sometimes the Mark I eyeball is still the best sensor we have. Jake felt his cheeks redden slightly, but Phoenix's criticism was delivered kindly, like a teacher correcting a student. You're right, General, he admitted. I should have been scanning visually first. Don't take it personally, Phoenix said. I've seen it in test pilots too. Technology is wonderful, but it can make us lazy. The best pilots know when to trust their instruments and when to trust their instincts. Sarah spoke up. General, could you tell us about testing the early F-22? What was it like being the first to fly those prototypes? Phoenix's eyes lit up with memory. Terrifying and exhilarating. We were pushing into unknown territory. Stealth technology, supercruise capability, advanced avionics, everything was experimental. Every flight was a test flight. and every test flight taught us something new about the aircraft's capabilities and limitations. She gestured toward the window, where several F-22 seconds sat on the flight line. The first prototype I flew barely resembled those beauties out there. We had constant system failures, flight control issues, engine problems, but each failure taught us how to make the aircraft better. Were you ever afraid? Sarah asked. Phoenix smiled. Every test pilot who says they're never afraid is either lying or shouldn't be test flying. Fear keeps you alert, keeps you focused on safety procedures. The trick is not letting fear paralyze you. You respect the danger while pushing the boundaries. Dr. Williams joined the conversation. Rebecca broke 14 different speed and altitude records during the F-22 development program, and she's being too modest about today. Her knowledge of emergency procedures and regional terrain probably saved multiple lives over her career. That's the job, Phoenix said simply. Test pilots accept risk so operational pilots can fly safely. Every procedure in your flight manuals was written in someone's blood, sweat, and sometimes tears. Colonel Patterson checked his watch. General, we should head over to the facility. The ceremony starts in an hour. As the group began to move toward the exit, Phoenix caught Jake and Sarah's arms gently. Walk with me for a moment, she said. They stepped outside into the clear afternoon air. Phoenix looked across the flight line at the sleek fighters and experimental aircraft scattered across the tarmac. You know, she said thoughtfully, when I first arrived at Edwards 35 years ago, there were people who didn't think women belonged in test flying. Some of them were pretty vocal about it. How did you handle that? Sarah asked. By being better than everyone else, Phoenix replied matter-of-factly. I studied harder, trained longer, and flew better than the critics. Eventually, performance spoke louder than prejudice. She turned to both of them. The same principle applies to all pilots, regardless of gender. Excellence is the great equalizer. The aircraft doesn't care who's flying it, only whether you can handle it safely and effectively. Jake nodded. Any advice for us, General? Phoenix was quiet for a moment, watching a young test pilot walk toward an experimental aircraft. Never stop learning, she finally said. Technology will continue to evolve. Aircraft will become more sophisticated. But the fundamentals of good flying never change. Situational awareness, quick decision-making, respect for the aircraft and the environment. Those skills are timeless. She paused and looked directly at each of them. And remember, you're not just flying aircraft. You're carrying forward the legacy of everyone who came before you, the pilots who tested these systems, the engineers who designed them, the ground crews who maintain them. Honor that legacy by being the best you can be. As they walked back toward the terminal, Jake felt a profound sense of connection to aviation history. Flying with Phoenix had been more than just an escort mission. It had been a masterclass in leadership, experience, and the evolution of military aviation. One more thing, Phoenix said as they reached the building. Captain Morrison, work on trusting your visual observations more, and Lieutenant Chen, that weather sense you showed today, develop it. Those instincts will serve you well throughout your career. Later, as Jake and Sarah prepared for their return flight, they watched Phoenix being escorted toward a small building on the far side of the base. A modest sign was being unveiled. The General Rebecca Martinez Test Pilot Training Facility. Think we'll ever see her again? Sarah asked. Jake smiled as he watched the legendary pilot disappear into the building that now bore her name. Something tells me Phoenix will always be around. One way or another. Legends like her don't really retire. They just become part of the aircraft they helped create. As their F-22 seconds lifted off from Edwards that evening, Jake couldn't help but feel that they were carrying a piece of Phoenix's legacy with them. The woman who had seemed like just a passenger had reminded them that behind every modern aircraft were generations of pilots, engineers, and visionaries who had pushed the boundaries of what was possible. And somewhere in the vastness of the desert sky, her spirit would always be flying.